So yeah, maybe throughout the time we'll try to get a collection of those. I love the idea, and I also realized that when I sent out the email yesterday that I forgot to send the attachment to the recording from last week, and that of course is going to be on the website too. But I like to kind of send those out to the group just so they have them in another fashion. So I will get that done as well. I think my brain was on short circuit when it came to what I was up to. This lesson was creating a lot of questions in my head. And I was just telling Pastor Peter, I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to lead something I have more questions on. But we're going to give it a try.
Here's the quick scene of the nativity that my daughter-in-law and son gave me last year for Christmas. Let's see if I can get it around here. It is tiny.
Oh, sweet.
You see it?
Yeah.
It's little tiny figurines on a plate. The plate is only about 5 inches wide.
I love it. That's kind of, in some ways, that's kind of nice. You could have a lot more options of where you can put it.
Right.
All right. Well, it's 5 after, and I know that there are some people that come from the drive-in, and that can sometimes be challenging. But we will get started because I know that, there's things going on today that people might want to get to. So today's lesson is called Promise of Potential. And we're going to spend some time with Mary. And for some of you, you may realize, or maybe most of you know, that Mary in the Catholic Church is incredibly important. In the Lutheran Church, we don't spend as much time thinking about or doing things around Mary as a Catholic Church. But my question for you before we get started is what comes to mind when you think of Mary, Mother of Jesus? And feel free to, take your mic off and just shout something out. Otherwise, I'll have to go around and call on people so we can have a conversation. Pat.
Okay, I grew up Catholic all the way through nursing school. So Mary was a big deal in my life and in our faith. We prayed to her frequently. So I can't all say it was, but she was just she was front and center, I guess, in growing up.
Okay.
And being the mother of God and just her whole story, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, same thing with me here. We prayed to Mary.
Yep.
And the Catholics even capitalized the mother for Mary too. So.
Yep.
Okay. Was there something about Mary's story that you remember coming through in your Catholic tradition that maybe we don't hear of? John.
Yeah, I was raised a Catholic. I went to a Catholic school until I was through the 6th grade, and we used to. Mary was a big thing, especially around May. We had the parade around the maypole.
Yep.
I remember songs about Mary.
Okay.
And I remember that. But when I was in the Catholic Church, every page you had to you handed in on the top of the page, you wrote JMJ, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and that was on every page. You did it. I don't know if any other Catholics had to do that, but I had to. And Mary was considered a big influence on Christ because he needed parents who let him be Jesus Christ, the boy, and Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And Mary was given more credit for that than Joseph was. But I'd write JMJ over everything. You cannot go into a Catholic church although the first two schools I went to, they did not have a Catholic church. We had a gymnasium where we had mass, but where you did not have a statue of a good-sized statue of Mary. Very important, and it was very important to my my mom especially. She always liked nuns. She thought nuns were great. Priests, she was a little in awe of, a little afraid of them, I think.
Okay. Christy, I see your hand going up. Christy, did you have a comment?
I consider Mary a young maiden.
A young maiden, okay.
A young maiden. I did not grow up Catholic, but that's my understanding of where Mary sits.
Okay. So for those of you who are coming in, we're just sharing what comes to mind when you think of Mary. Where is she in the story of Jesus's life or her life? Anyone else have anything they want to share?
Penny, Mary is one, to me, Mary is one of those characters in the Bible that you want to know so much more about. We really don't know much about her. It's interesting, the Quran actually has more on Mary than the Bible does. And as a consequence, Mary is certainly someone that I have admired and revered, but just want to know more about what was her life like after the birth. And we don't pick up on her really until the journey that Christ makes without his parents, and then at the crucifixion is what
right. Yeah, she doesn't disappear, but it's like you want to know more. I would agree. Anybody else want to share a thought on Mary before we watch the video?
Well, she stayed involved because she was there at the water into wine wedding.
Yeah.
And
so she was around. She was definitely around. She wasn't like all of us mothers want to be with our sons. Right? We want to be around, make sure things are going okay, be there for support. So yeah, I think that she definitely was there. Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. Chris is my video man again. So Chris, could you play the video? Are you okay? Great. Go back to the start if you can. Great. Thank you.
After the angel Gabriel announces to Mary that she will bear this special child, Mary still has a little bit of confusion, a little bit of doubt. So the angel says to her, I can give you a sign. Your cousin Elizabeth, who had been struggling with fertility all her life, your cousin Elizabeth is pregnant. Go visit her. So Mary heads off to visit Elizabeth and her husband Zachariah in the hill country of Judea. And she finds Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is pregnant. Fascinating. We have two pregnant Jewish women, and Zachariah, who had doubted what the angel said, has been struck mute. I love the idea of these two pregnant women who can talk with each other, and Zachariah has nothing to say and can't speak. Elizabeth hails the visit of Mary. Mary is delighted to see Elizabeth. Elizabeth recognizes that the baby that Mary is carrying is her Lord. Elizabeth is the first outsider to recognize who Jesus is, which makes her a prophet. Elizabeth is fabulous. And she says to Mary, happy is she, even blessed is she, who believed that the Lord would fulfill the promises he made to her. And following Elizabeth's blessing, Mary bursts into song. The song is sometimes called the Magnificat because Mary magnifies the glory of God. Fascinating psalm, very similar to the song that Hannah, another ancient person who struggled with fertility and eventually gave birth to the prophet Samuel, sang. In this song, in Mary's Magnificat, Mary proclaims about God, He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered those with arrogant thoughts and proud inclinations. He has pulled down the powerful from their thrones. He has lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and has sent the rich away empty-handed. And the amazing thing here is that the verbs are all in the past tense. Mary is proclaiming what God has already done. Yes, Advent is all about the future. It's the birth of the baby. It's the entering of the Lord Jesus into the world. But it also recognizes the power of God, beginning with the book of Genesis and continuing throughout history. We don't look at God just as acting in the future. We celebrate God's actions in the past. There are only two Christmas stories in the New Testament, one in Matthew and one in Luke. Matthew simply tells us that Mary was a virgin at the time that Jesus was conceived. Luke gives us a little bit more detail about Mary's living in Galilee, for example, and her relationship with Joseph, how Mary and Joseph together go to Bethlehem. But we get almost no detail on Mary's background. Matthew gives us an entire genealogy of Jesus. Luke gives us an entire genealogy of Jesus. They both go through Joseph. So we hear nothing about Mary's parents, whether she had brothers or sisters, how old she was at the time she had this meeting with the angel, or when she married Joseph, which means we have to fill in the gaps. Historically, Mary was a first-century Jewish woman, perhaps from an artisan family, because Joseph is an artisan, he's a woodworker. I don't think she's a peasant. She may well have helped out with family income by working in textiles, working in pottery, perhaps having an herb garden, perhaps tending some animals. She might have been educated, although most women at the time were illiterate. She would have known the stories of Israel. She would have known those wonderful heroines, Sarah and Rebecca, Rachel and Leah, Deborah and Miriam, the ancient prophets, the ancient women who carried on Torah observance, who told the stories to their children. We find out a little bit more about Mary from post-New Testament legend, Roman Catholic legend, Eastern Orthodox legend, which may in fact be true. We simply don't know. According to church tradition, Mary had a mother whose name was Anna, and that would make some sense because Anna is simply the Greek form of Hannah, and Hannah reminds us of the infertile mother, ultimately pregnant, of the prophet Samuel. We find out that Mary was raised in the temple. Probably not the case because the Jerusalem temple did not function like a daycare. But what the church wanted to do is fill in the gaps, to tell Mary's story, what Mary's childhood was like, what her courtship was like with Joseph, what her early years of marriage were like, what raising Jesus was like. The stories might not be true historically, or at least we cannot prove them, and in some cases we may have some doubts. But what these other stories do is tell us the compelling aspect of the Christmas story itself. It is as if the Gospels open up to us and say, here's a little bit of the story. It's now your job to fill in the details. It's now your job to tell the story in your own words. Normally when we tell time by the year, sometimes by our birth date, sometimes by the year that we graduated. But Luke wants us to think of time in a different way, not the time of the Roman emperor, but the time of the action of God. Luke sets the scene of the angel Gabriel's annunciation, the announcement to Mary that she is going to become pregnant with this remarkable special child by saying, when Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a city in Galilee. Luke tells time by women's biological rhythms. Jesus' birth is set not only in the context of world history when Caesar Augustus reigned. Jesus' conception is set in the time of Elizabeth's pregnancy. The angel Gabriel comes to Mary and begins by greeting her. This is where the famous Hail Mary comes from. In the CEB translation, it's rejoice, favored one. a perfectly fine translation. And then the angel Gabriel tells Mary that she will bear this special child. When the angel Gabriel tells Mary that she's about to have a baby, Mary asks a very good question. Here in the CEB translation, then Mary said to the angel, "How will this happen since I haven't had sexual relations with a man?" And Gabriel explains, not in gynecological terms, but in theological ones, the Holy Spirit will overshadow you, and that which is conceived in you will be called holy, a child of God. Whether Luke considered Mary to be a virgin at the time of conception is not clear, but we get that clarity in the Gospel of Matthew. So we have to go to Matthew for the fulfillment citation. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Joseph is engaged to a woman named Mary, and suddenly Mary is pregnant. Joseph realizes that the child is not his, and being a righteous man, Matthew is very interested in the concept of righteousness. Being a righteous man, Joseph resolves to divorce Mary quietly. He doesn't want to make a big stink about this. There's nothing about stoning. Things happen. Joseph says, fine, that's the way it is. But then Joseph has a dream. And it would make good sense for Joseph to have a dream because according to Matthew, Joseph's father is named Jacob. And we have already seen back in the book of Genesis, a fellow named Joseph who dreams dreams, and that fellow named Joseph, of course, of Genesis, a fellow. So Joseph has a dream, and he's told in the dream, do not be afraid to take Mary for your wife, because that which is conceived in her is conceived by the Holy Spirit. And there's a reason for that. Matthew tells us this was done to fulfill what was said by the prophet. Behold, a virgin will conceive and bear a child, and you will call his name Emmanuel. Matthew is here citing from the Greek translation of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 7, verse 14. And in the Greek, Isaiah actually does proclaim a virgin will have a child. There's a problem here, however, in terms of translation. All translators are traitors. Every time we take a word or a phrase or a story in one language and put it into another, something will get added in that doesn't belong and something will drop out that does, because all words have nuance. The prophet Isaiah, who originally wrote in Hebrew, said nothing about a virgin at all. Isaiah is talking about a sign, like a visual aid that he's giving to the king at the time. The king is worried about making an international alliance. Isaiah says, don't do it, just sit tight. And then the sign that he gives is, look, see that pregnant young woman over there. By the time her child is old enough to eat solid food, your problems will go away. That pregnant young woman, and the word for young woman in Hebrew is alma. Doesn't say virgin, it just says young woman. That pregnant young woman became pregnant the same way pretty much everybody else becomes pregnant, the natural way. Her pregnancy is no more and no less miraculous than anybody else's pregnancy. But when the prophet Isaiah was translated into Greek 250 years before the time of Jesus, the word for young woman, alma in Hebrew, becomes in Greek parthenos. And you would know the term Parthenos from the Parthenon, the temple to the virgin goddess Athena. There is, by the way, a Parthenon in Nashville, and people in Nashville are wont to say ours is better than the one in Greece because ours is newer. Those of you who do biology might have heard the expression parthenogenesis, which is conception without the aid of sperm. Did it mean virgin at the time? Yes, it could also mean young woman. But by the time Matthew was reading this text 250 years later, Parthenos for Matthew really meant virgin. So Matthew read his Greek correctly. In his Greek translation of Isaiah, the prophet predicts a virginal conception, and Matthew makes that prediction palpable by citing the text in relation to Mary's pregnancy. Who got it right? The synagogue reading the Hebrew got it right. The church reading the Greek got it right as well. Because in religion, unlike elementary school mathematics, you can have two competing, in fact, opposite views. And theologically, you can both be correct. Gabriel's Annunciation to Mary is a story of hope. It's a story of courage. It's a story of Mary's choice, but it's also a story of Joseph's choice. Because he listens to this dream, he marries a woman who's carrying a child that's not his, and he will protect this child. The story of Advent is not all about what God has done for us. It's that, but it's more. The story of Advent is a challenge to us. Can we think the impossible? Can we do the unexpected? Can we imagine a world that functions otherwise, in which God is palpable, in which God's justice can be seen, in which a small family from Galilee, together with their relatives in Judea, can celebrate presence, can celebrate children who are wanted, can celebrate how relationships work, and can look to the future not only with hope, but with the realization that they have a job to do as well. The Annunciation is not just God's good news to us, it's our good news to each other.
And Chris, before you head out, if you want to give me control again of hosting. Did you hear me? So, before I start any particular leading, is there anything in what she spoke about there intrigue you, challenge you, that you'd like to mention or bring up or start a discussion on?
Yeah, Penny. When I went to Catholic school for 6 years, I can tell you every morning you had mass. So I went to mass basically 5 days a week plus Sunday, and every day you had catechism. And as a kid, I was infatuated. I think I can say the classes were infatuated and I was taught by nuns, primarily. I was infatuated with the stories of Jesus being a member of a family and having, little questions like, was he did he ever do anything wrong? Did he ever do this, that, and the other thing? And we had a lot of fun and awe that Christ, the Son of God, was also a little boy who was raised by a parent. And that was a lot of conversation in the catechism, because, you're not a real deep thinker at least I was, when you're in the first, second, third, fourth, but you can relate to little boys and little girls and moms. And in those days, I can say this about me for sure, moms did more in raising you than fathers did. They had a very different role in the 50s. I was born in 1949. They had a very different role, I think, than they do nowadays, where women are still probably the primary, I think, raisers of children. But women when I was growing up were basically the only ones. And it was kind of interesting to relate to the Jesus, Mary, and Joseph family as being somewhat of a family too. Not so much after he left home, but when he was home. And there was a good book called Lamb. I don't know if anybody's read it, but it's about Jesus. It's not historically correct, but it's about Jesus, the boy, when he was young and he was mischievous and funny and a very loving son. But I saw Mary as just like a mother, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah. Anyone else? Anything that she mentioned?
Start video.
Jeff, did you have something?
I do.
Oh,
Christy does.
Chrissy.
I can't.
Okay.
Okay. I've always thought of Mary as making a choice, but I'd never thought of it that Joseph had a choice to make too. And that was fabulous that and she brought that up, that he, could have said, no way, Jose, and, moved on, but he made the choice to go and follow the angel. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we sometimes think, okay, well, an angel shows up, so you do what they say. But they did have a choice, just like, God had a choice to pick who he was going to have do it. Someone from a little town in Nazareth, which she had mentioned in the book that, was maybe, 50 households. And, she mentions it's in Galilee because a lot of people of that time may not have even known where Nazareth was. It wasn't part of Judea. It was, just this little hole in the wall type place. So, yeah. Anything else?
Can I add something too, Penny? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I really like that lifting up of the Joseph narrative a little bit more too. And just how it goes back to Joseph the dreamer in the Old Testament in Genesis. I think there, when Matthew is writing that kind of parallelism and kind of thinking about this story as another Genesis, there's a bunch of foreshadowing and kind of overlays to that I really like. And I think it's really important to pay attention to those kind of like similar names, similar what she said about Mary's mom being potentially Anna as a precursor to Hannah. Not Hannah, your pup, Penny, but yeah, I think those parallelisms are really, really interesting to know kind of the depth or the layers to those stories for the original hearers. Does that make sense?
In the book, she actually talks a lot about name.
Yeah.
About
Huge.
Mary, the name of Mary, even how Mary, and we talked about this last week too, in Jewish families that, they're always looking for a name within the family or the lineage that they could be named after. And that there's, Mary's name has a lot of symbolic value. She reminds us of Miriam, a clever and courageous sister of Moses. So it goes back to the story of Moses. She tucked him away in a little ark and then went and found somebody to nurse Moses so there's that, who happened to have ended up actually being his mother. So there's that whole story. And how she mentions that, and that makes her a bit of a prophet. And I always thought of prophet as someone who foretold future, as a prophecy. But actually, she also mentions in here that prophets are also people who proclaim something that has happened in the past. And for me, that was something that came out in the book too, that there's a lot of proclamation. And it's almost like we need to have people continually telling us the story to remind us about this relationship that God continues to work at with us in all these different fashions throughout the history of people.
Amen.
So there's that. Anybody else have something that triggered? Yeah, Lois.
I was just sort of, for the first time, wondering about the age difference we're talking between Mary and Elizabeth. I mean, that they're listed as cousins, but how were they cousins? I mean, she must have been old enough to be grandmother, granddaughter, age-wise, you would think, based on what they're saying about her being Elizabeth being unfertile, and just kind of curious about what kind of relationship they really had.
Yeah, that's, and the term cousin, for
There's
some
really-
people, we think of first cousins, and others we think of much broader sense. So
Is
yeah,
there
that's
any, is
good
there
question.
anything in the genealogies that would indicate how she was related?
not that I know of. And then Pastor Peter disappeared. So,
No, I'm still here.
oh, there you are. Somebody else
Yeah,
disappeared.
no, I don't. I'm not sure either on that. We could do a little research into that. I think it's going to be another gap though, kind of like what Amy is talking about. That was kind of filled in. That it's really hard to determine those ages. But I love that idea of the intergenerational connection that they have. I love that, imagining Elizabeth to have kind of a to be kind of nurturing and mentoring this younger Mary, and kind of what that faithfulness looks like in terms of kind of the wisdom of the elder and the wonder and the favoredness of this young Mary.
Anything else? Rita.
At the same time, they're both going through a first pregnancy. So it's like they're peers, which is kind of a, they're sharing the excitement of that pregnancy waiting time and the unexpectedness for both of them. So it's kind of an interesting, not just one faceted, but multifaceted relationship there.
I love that. I love that. That's really cool.
Kind of breaks that barrier of generation in sharing something in common, which is neat. Which, yeah, I hadn't thought of that before either. Any other thoughts?
Penny, right at the end, she talked about, if I understood her correctly, that there was room in the church for an interpretation of the words young woman and virgin. I actually found that very helpful. I'm wondering how Peter would respond to that.
Yeah, totally. I love that. And I think I really appreciate that, that this is that the equation or the algorithm of the theological is often a little bit different than math or elementary. What did you say? Elementary math or something like that. Yeah, I think that's how those ideas exist together simultaneously. I think as from both a kind of Wesleyan perspective as well as a Lutheran perspective, having that kind of simultaneity of ideas existing actually makes it a stronger idea. That's kind of a paradox. I think I find it more compelling. Yeah. What's your thought on that, Bob?
I would agree. And in fact, I'm sure like many, I've read books on people who have talked about this, and often it's couched in controversy and almost conflict.
Yeah.
And I thought she had a way of saying, church, let us be at peace with this. And as a consequence, that was very helpful to me.
I love that. Yeah, well said. Well said.
Any other thoughts or comments on that in particular, maybe? How would this story be different if we only heard Mary's story or if we only heard Joseph's story? What kind of effect do you think that would have on you and where this had meaning? Rita.
It would be a lot flatter. Things just are more three-dimensional when you see them from different sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that, and we don't hear much about Joseph at all after this. Do we hear about him again?
Joseph would have been, he wouldn't have gotten any of it. I mean, the angel wouldn't have talked to him, so he wouldn't have understood that. No, it would be flat, like Rita said. Joseph would have left out a lot, and we need to know all that other stuff.
Well, Joseph was spoken to in another dream by
Yes.
the angels when he was told to go to Egypt. And then
Right.
Joseph was also in the story of going to the temple when Jesus was 12.
Right.
But yeah, there's not a whole lot more interaction there. I mean, more detail.
I find it interesting that Joseph gets to hear from an angel in a dream. And the impression I have in the story is Mary is not dreaming. She is awake and present doing something when an angel shows up. And I find that all interesting too, as far as who gets what kind of angel experience.
Like that.
Which, to me says that, we each hear from God in different ways, and she also mentions in the book too that, let me see if I can find it, that much of what people at this time in hearing about God and the stories, it's all about hearing. It's not about seeing so much as about hearing. And, it says to, listen, pay attention. And that perception, when we're so visual, we got our YouTubes and we got our TV and we got all of that stuff, and how having to pay attention by listening, how that might impact your response as well. Any other things?
Well, they're all literate. They're all literate at that time. Yeah, so it's the spoken and hearing and paying attention stuff is really paramount because nobody can read.
So how would you respond if what would you think or feel, do you think, if all of a sudden an angel showed up and started giving an annunciation to you? Put yourself in Mary's shoes. Any thoughts?
I might look at history and the organization of kings and people in high positions. Interpreting dreams was extremely not just popular, but extremely important. And so the idea that you would get information from a dream was kind of like, of course you're going to get information from a dream. There isn't too many, there weren't too many kings that didn't have somebody in a very high position, paid well and what have you, that didn't have someone interpret the dream. So dreams, nowadays we look at dreams as, well, everybody's got dreams, and some of them are really not very nice, some of them are very nice. And you could interpret them, or you could basically say that's just brain cells doing whatever brain cells do at night. So I think the narrative of Mary and Joseph follow the times of having dreams have a tremendous meaning. I was going to also mention one other thing. Part of my journey as being a Catholic, and then for a while not wanting to go to church at all, and then coming back into Catholicism, and then becoming a Lutheran, involves kind of throwing out the whole Bible at one point, because I thought it was nothing but power, a method of power from religious leaders who had a reason to have power. And so a lot of the stories, for example, there were so many virgin births in history that it's not a unique concept that there's a virgin birth to a king. They happen not all the time, but they happen quite often. it kind of did a complete circle when I ask myself now, how much does it matter that she had a dream, or that she had a virgin birth? I think the important thing to me has nothing to do with how important that was. It has to do with Jesus dying for our sin, and everything else is kind of cultural and maybe incorrect. But like I said, that's my journey. I have a kind of a circuitous journey of believing, not believing, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. But I wonder, how important is the fact that she is purported to be a virgin? Does that really matter, or that Joseph saw a dream that was supposedly from an angel? I just say, what is that? How does that affect Jesus dying for our sins and loving us?
Good questions. Good questions. One of the things she mentions near the end, she talked about Advent is more than what God has done for us. It has to do with, can we think about the impossible, was one of the things. And for me, that's kind of where the story comes in, is pushing that envelope of making us consider what can happen, how the impossible can be possible. Not that that necessarily is factual, but considering the story of possibility. And she titles this one The Promise of Potential. How does this story generate the idea of what potential is there for us in relationship with God? What potential is there for us that, the good news is more about what we receive, but what we do with that, what's the potential? And so the story, after reading the book, especially because she always gives so much other stuff in there, kind of, that idea of hope and potential, that it's not just a simple story of someone got pregnant, gave birth, there's Jesus, end story. There's a lot of stuff going around it. So that's just some of my perceptions on it. I'm sure you all have other thoughts as well. Anyone want to share? I see smiles. Another thing that comes up is Christy, you were moving? No? Darn. Oh, come on, you must be thinking something. No pressure. The other thing that comes up is the whole story of the Song of Mary, or the Magnificat. And it's in Luke, chapter 1, 46 to 55. Let me pull it out here. And for some reason, she likes to use the is it CEB or CBE version? But Mary says, "With all my heart, I glorify the Lord. In the depths of who I am, I rejoice in God, my Savior. He has looked with favor on the low status of his servant. Look, from now on, everyone will consider me highly favored, because the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name. He shows mercy to everyone, from one generation to the next, who honors him as God. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered those with arrogant thoughts and proud inclinations. He has pulled the powerful down from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty-handed. He has come to aid of his servant Israel, remembering his mercy just as he promised our ancestors, to Abraham and to Abraham's ancestors, or Abraham's descendants forever. And so any comments on that at all? Otherwise, if you take a look at this, you can see a lot of parallels where Hannah also had infertility problems. So Mary's wasn't an infertility problems, but here's another one, infertility problems. So it's about this kind of miraculous birth. And her birth is of Samuel. And that one is in 1 Samuel 2:2-10. And her song is, my heart rejoices in the Lord. My strength rises up in the Lord. And here the term is, my mouth mocks my enemies because I rejoice in your deliverance. No one is holy like the Lord. No one except you. There is no rock like our God. You know, she's just really kind of mentioning again that, you know, kind of like God is it. You know, God's got this. Don't go on and on talking so proudly, spouting arrogance from your mouth, because the Lord is the God who knows, and he weighs every act. The bows of mighty warriors are shattered, but those who were stumbling now dress themselves in power. Those who were filled full now sell themselves for bread, but the ones who were starving are now fat from food. The woman who was barren has birthed 7 children, but the mother with many sons has lost them all. There's a lot of this that's almost like the whole idea of God's turned things on its head. The expected is not happening, and the unexpected has happened. Those that did not have anything now have what they need. There's this constant juxtaposition, and it goes on from there. So you can take a closer look on it if you want, but it was something that was very unfamiliar to me. And Pastor Peter, I don't know if you have anything else to say about it, if you're there. Sometimes he's not.
No,
Oh, there you
I'm here.
No pressure.
I think what, for me, knowing some of those kind of hearkening backs or some of those allusions makes the story more powerful for me. And it really kind of, it draws the continuous line of the way that God has worked in the past and through kind of these different characters again and again. That's why I really like the parallelism of Hannah and Mary and their songs or their Magnificats.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Lois, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you have to wonder exactly how this was recorded. I mean, there was nobody there to hear it except for Elizabeth. I doubt that it was written down word for word. So you kind of wonder where the words were recorded at some point. I mean, were they ever said by Mary? Was it something that the original church thought she should have been saying? Or, I mean, she was a young, based on what ages people got married at that time, she was relatively young and probably not all that well versed in scripture. And you just have to kind of wonder where that came from.
I think we do a lot of that, wondering about that. For me, the only thing that I kind of go back to is it's really hard for us to imagine living in a time where we didn't write things down and read, that all of what we relayed information wise was by word of mouth. And so things change when we do that. But things also change when we write things down. People change what the word phrasing is, which then oftentimes can get changed into people thinking it means something different. But that dependence on the oral tradition, I think we sometimes forget how good that was in continuing to make the stories stay alive. So that's my thought on it. Don't know if that's correct.
I think that's a lot of the way that historians would talk about the oral tradition, and how similarly to how visual we are, and how our eyes have kind of adjusted to that people's ears were in a similar kind of they were tuned, they were so well tuned, and that's where their accuracy might reflect a better ear than we have today. Does that make sense? Is that what you're saying, Penny?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is what I'm saying. Yeah, not only that, but she talked last time too about stories were acted out.
Yeah.
So if you have and there's something about memory where when you get a physicality along with it, that it can stay with you better.
Yeah.
When you've acted something out, as opposed to, well, they even today they'll say reading something on actual paper stays in your head better than reading it off your computer screen. Not sure what that is.
Yeah.
Is it because there's a tactile nature to it that we don't know is present? So that's
and there
important.
is and I think there's also this level of the idea of a single story, and in cultures and communities where they're really rooted around a single story that we're really not anymore. Is there more kind of understanding, not necessarily the way that we would study or interpret the stories today, but are there ways that they were engaging the telling of these stories that allowed them to be kind of more ingrained than we can today?
I guess another question is do we tell stories now more for factual correctness versus telling a story to relate an impression or a message?
Or the theological perspective, right? Mm-hmm.
She has an interesting statement in the book. She says, this is not a gospel of gain. This is a gospel of trust. It's not a gospel of wealth. It's a gospel of thanks. Mary ends her prayer with a remembrance, a recollection of God's servant Israel, of God's promises of mercy, of God's promise to Abraham and his descendants. The new covenant that Jesus offers in his body and blood does not replace the old covenants with Abraham or Moses or David. Rather, it is a continuation of those ancient promises have a universal import, for God had promised Abraham, I will make you a great nation and will bless you, and I will make your name respected and you will be blessed. I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you I will curse. All the families of the earth will be blessed because of you. And that's from Genesis. So, and then she adds to that, from one people faithful to the Torah comes the message. You must love your neighbor as yourself and any immigrant who lives with you. When these commandments are kept, all who hold the text as sacred, the hungry are fed. And that's kind of how she ends the chapter. And so that whole idea of story, the intent of story, what are you trying to express? What are you hoping the listener will hear?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you hear the story around Advent, I guess the challenge I would present to you is listen to hear something different, to hear something new that maybe you haven't heard before. what does the imagination bring to you that you might not have considered? Anything else? Otherwise, it's, let me see, what time is it? Looks like it's just about noon. If you don't have anything else, we can end it there. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it very much. Our next week is called Journey of Joy. And thank you so much.
Penny.
Penny.
And again, I'll put a plug in for Rita's idea that if you want to send a picture of your nativities to me, we can maybe try to do a collection of them and then put those out. That might be kind of a fun thing. I, of course, have not gotten mine out of the box yet, so.
I love that. I look forward to seeing everybody's. That sounds cool.
So thank you so much. Have a great week. Always wonderful to see you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.